they announced that Ingmar Gwandike was guilty of the murder of Chandra Levy.
On October 18th, the trial against Ingmar for the murder of Chandra Levy began in earnest, with a dozen or more reporters jammed into the tightly packed courtroom. For those in the press, they were interested in how the prosecution would explain how they made their case without forensic evidence, DNA, or a murder weapon, or even a cause of death. Amanda began her case stating that Ingmar bound and restrained Chandra before he robbed her and left her in the park. The cause of death was not established during the trial, but she pointed to Chandra's knotted leggings. Of course, Ingmar's defense rested on the fact that there was no direct evidence to tie him to the scene.
Then, seemingly out of nowhere, a man named Armando Morales approached Amanda. He had been in prison with Ingmar and claimed to have information proving his guilt. But just who was Armando and why should they trust him? Well, Armando was a native of Fresno with a long criminal record. He was Ingmar's cellmate in Kentucky during 2006, and both had joined a similar gang. But according to Armando, the two men considered one another brothers while inside, and said that once Ingmar confessed to him, he admitted to Armando that he had murdered Chandra, but didn't her. This was an important distinction because Ingmar didn't want to become a target of assault while in prison. What's more important is that Armando said Ingmar stole Chandra's fanny pack, and any information surrounding Chandra's fanny pack had been purposely withheld by police. To Amanda, this made Armando credible and made Ingmar guilty. And to the jury, Armando seemed honest, and they were impressed by the way he communicated the information. However, for Chandra's mother, Susan, it was surreal and painful. After 10 days of testimony, the trial concluded as the jury deliberated for 3.5 days. Most in the press thought it would result in a hung jury. However, when they returned with their verdict, they announced that Ingmar Gwandike was guilty of the murder of Chandra Levy. Ingmar, who was listening to the trial through a translator, yanked off his headphones and threw them on the table. On February 11, 2011, Ingmar returned to the courtroom for sentencing. Here, Chandra's mother looked at him and said, quote, "You are a hideous creature. You are lower than a cockroach. You should rot in hell," before finishing with, "Finally, Mr. Gwandike, you." For the Levys, this case was closed, but of course, emotionally, they never felt like they could recover from the loss of their daughter. However, this would not be the end of the case, because in 2016, a woman came to the Washington Post telling them the star witness was a complete fraud. A second trial, because of this, was ordered for Ingmar Gwandike, scheduled for March 2016. However, the prosecution quickly realized that Armando was, in fact, their only evidence directly linking Ingmar to Chandra's case, and without him, they had nothing.
And then on July 28, 2016, the state announced that it was dropping all charges against Ingmar, and he was set for deportation instead of his prison sentence. He was officially deported to El Salvador in May of 2017.